You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanovan. Let's begin with the top headlines making news around the world. Iran and Oman are discussing a temporary Strait of Hormuz corridor as the diplomatic impasse with Washington drags on. The CIA chief made a rare unannounced visit to Moscow for contacts with Russian security services. And Donald Trump's Saudi nuclear deal is now before Congress amid warnings over potential proliferation risks. Tensions between Iran and the United States continue to rise, with the Strait of Hormuz remaining at the center of the dispute over security, shipping, and regional influence.
Iran warns that the United States will have no role in the region's destiny. Iran's Supreme National Security Council Secretary, Mohsen Rezai, says regional countries should decide their own future. The United States says its forces have cleared mines from the strait, while Iran has rejected that claim and warned that any U.S. mine-clearing vessels entering the area would be considered targets. NBC News reported that Iranian missile and drone attacks damaged U.S. intelligence facilities and surveillance equipment across the region, with repairs expected to cost billions of dollars. Meanwhile, Washington is expanding economic pressure on Tehran, announcing new sanctions and warning countries and companies that continue doing business with Iran they could face penalties. Britain backs the U.S. approach, while Qatar says it will only support internationally approved sanctions. Alongside Pakistan, Doha is calling for diplomacy as the only way to resolve the crisis. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari says further escalation would harm the entire region and urged a return to negotiations.
Regardless of whether new sanctions are imposed or the previous situation persists, what matters to the state of Qatar is the resumption of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. This requires a diplomatic solution that yields a positive outcome.
Qatar says contacts with both Washington and Tehran are continuing as mediators work to bring the two sides back to talks. U.S. officials say no new military strikes against Iran are expected in the near term, with the focus shifting to economic and maritime pressure. Despite ongoing tensions, the United States has begun returning some diplomatic personnel to Middle Eastern missions that were reduced during the crisis. At the same time, public support for the war in the U.S. has declined, with polling showing lower approval of the conflict and President Donald Trump ahead of November's congressional elections.
Iran and Oman have discussed a framework to establish a temporary shipping corridor at the Strait of Hormuz. It comes after a visit by Omani Foreign Minister to Tehran. The waterway is coming up to its sixth month of disruption, with many shipping firms staying away over the risk of attack and backsliding. A News correspondent Turaj Shirali has the latest.
Iran's foreign ministry says Iran and Oman have agreed on implementing a joint project on a maritime corridor and to demine the waterway that links the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, namely the Strait of Hormuz. The agreement came after Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and his Omani counterpart Badr al-Busaidi met in Tehran on Tuesday. According to a ministry statement, they discussed a phased framework that included establishing a temporary joint shipping corridor. The statement added that technical consultations will continue to decide on a permanent route, the future administration of the strait, and a mechanism for exchanging information, traffic management, and providing navigation services at the narrow waterway. Araghchi said that Iran's commitment to peace and stability is matched by a steadfast diplomacy with its neighbors. He made the comment on X after his meeting with Oman's foreign minister and a phone call with Pakistani Army Chief Asim Munir following his visit to Tehran on Monday. He also held a separate phone call with Qatar's foreign minister Mohammed Al Thani, which according to official sources focused on the latest regional developments and joint efforts to establish peace and security in the region. The diplomatic encounters in Tehran early this week were hit by Washington's announcement of increased sanctions. Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai slammed this move in a post on X. branding the U.S. economic war against Iran as an attack on the national sovereignty of all countries and an assault on the right of all nations to self-determination. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Meanwhile, Iranian businesses say the impact of new economic sanctions is starting to bite, along with the ongoing costs arising from the conflict in the Gulf.
U.S. sanctions are adding to the economic hardship in Iran, with shopkeepers saying the measures are making business and everyday life even harder amid the war. In Bandar Abbas, businesses say the impact is being felt through a weaker currency, higher prices, and greater pressure on livelihoods.
Under any circumstances, sanctions do inflict blows. The rise in the exchange rate affects life and livelihood, but ultimately we are Iranians, and Iranians know how to bypass sanctions well.
The latest restrictions, announced on Monday, could see countries trading with Iran cut off from the dollar-based financial system. The new measures come as Iran faces wider economic disruption linked to the conflict with the U.S. and Israel, which has also severely affected shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial route for around a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments.
In the way that we are under pressure, we are 100% distressed. The youth have many grievances against the officials who, really, in my opinion, they are traitors. Why? Because they truly do not attend to the people's suffering.
General inflation stands at around 69%, according to reports, with price tags on some imported foods seeing triple-digit annual cost spikes. The Iranian rial has also plummeted to an all-time low. Decades of international trade restrictions, combined with domestic economic mismanagement and now fresh sanctions, are adding to the strain on businesses and households already struggling.
The Strait of Hormuz remains at the center of a growing confrontation between Iran and the United States. Iran says the strategic waterway is still closed despite a proposed temporary shipping corridor with Oman. Tehran also insists that Washington must return to its previous commitments before the strait can fully reopen. The dispute comes as President Donald Trump says U.S. forces have cleared mines from international waters, while Washington signals that new sanctions against Iran are imminent. So where is the Middle East heading? To discuss all this, we're joined by Akram Zawi, Associate Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, joining us from Dubai, UAE. Akram, thank you very much for making time to join us on the program.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Akram, let me start with the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says the strait remains closed, while the U.S. president says the mines have been cleared. How should we understand the situation on the ground right now?
I think it's really a combination of both, I was going to say, in the sense the US president has an interest in maintaining the message that things are going according to the plan, if there was a plan in the first place. But he has an interest in making sure that all prices remain low, and for the moment they are below $100. He has an interest in telling his voters, potential voters, that the economic situation is under control, that inflation is under control. He has an interest in seeing financial markets the same. So I think this is part of his messaging. On the other hand, it is true, and he has a point in saying that there is energy, oil, gas, refined products flowing out of the Strait of Hormuz, or at least flowing out of the Gulf. And in this sense, I think there has been a partial failure from the Iranians to ensure full closure. So obviously, we are in a situation of war. This means that there is war communication. But the US president has a point in saying that the Iranians have not fully closed the strait. Of course, the situation is far from optimal, and some countries in the region, such as Qatar and Kuwait, are feeling the bite. But there is energy flowing, and again, the president is mostly looking at the price of energy and at the domestic economic front in the US.
Akram, Iran and Oman have discussed a temporary shipping corridor. Could this become a practical mechanism for restoring maritime traffic, or is it mainly a diplomatic arrangement designed to buy time?
It's a good point to say that it's designed to buy time, in the sense that I think one of the key objectives of the Omanis from the very start has been to keep Iran engaged in a discussion. This is why they have never cut their contacts. This is why on the eve of the the start of the Israeli-US war on Iran, the Omani foreign ministry also went out on TV saying where the negotiations stood. So I think the Omanis are trying to hold firm in terms of continuing the discussion and the conversation. The Iranians obviously also have an interest in demonstrating to the US that they are still talking to the countries in the region and that they still have an interest in a diplomatic solution, because at the end, the Omanis and the Iranians both very well know that the only solution will be diplomatic. But at the same time, I think it's important to see that the Iranians are trying to convert what they deem to be some sort of a victory in their war against Israel and the US, in the sense that the regime did not collapse, that there is a form of new status quo around Hormuz, that they have been a serious threat, to their environment. The Iranians are keen to convert what they seem to consider as strategic gains into permanent gains. And so their negotiations with the Omanis also aim to achieve that. Regarding the Omanis themselves, I think it's important to see that the Sultan of Oman toured the UK and France last month, and that part of his objective is also to frame a possible agreement. And by the way, an agreement around Hormuz with Oman-Iran negotiations was part of the MOU. It was point 5 of the MOU signed by Iranian President Pezeshkian and US President Trump. It's important for the Omanis to ground this agreement in something that would be politically and economically agreeable to countries in the region, but also legitimate from the point of view of international law.
So President Donald Trump says the U.S. Navy has removed or detonated mines in international waters and has warned Iran against placing new ones. Does this significantly change the balance of power around the strait?
Again, at this stage, at least, it's quite difficult to verify these claims. There is a very strong component of war communication. I remind you that, for example, Trump tried to signal that the Strait of Hormuz was now US territory, that after Israel bombed Qatar, he said that all Qatari critical infrastructure would be considered, all attack on Qatari critical infrastructure would be considered a direct attack on US interest. So there is a lot of communication, but what does it mean really is more complicated to assess. At the end of the day, what the US is trying to do is downplaying the importance of an agreement with Iran. Tell the Iranians that they don't need their sign up on any agreement and that they could move forward without them, notably in demining the strait, that they don't need the ongoing talks between Oman and Iran, which in part explains the kind of pressure that Trump has exerted on Oman, threatening this longtime US ally to bomb it twice in the past few months. So it's a lot of signaling from the US, really. And it's signaling part of war communication that happens at the same time the US is increasing economic pressure on Iran. So it's about trying to bring Tehran to its knees, which shows that in the entourage of the US president, there is still the conviction that Iran can be pressured into an agreement, can be pressured into agreeing to US terms in how this war ends.
Akram, could Oman emerge as the key mediator between Washington and Tehran? And what leverage does Muscat have? And how realistic is it for Oman to broker a sustainable arrangement over Hormuz?
So Oman is doing two things. First of all, it's continuing its role as a mediator as it was standing before the war began. So they are continuing these negotiations. And second, they are doing that in the framework of point 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding signed between US President Trump and Iranian President Pezeshkian. So they have this sort of political legitimacy. And at the same time, they are trying to ground their action, their mediation in international law, hence their talks with the France and the United Kingdom, for example. So this is how Oman is acting. Does it have the power to act? I think the only thing that why they have it, first of all, because the Strait of Hormuz is a strait between Iranian waters and Omani waters, so they have this legitimacy. Second, because the Iranians agree to talk to them, because the Iranians are also looking for a diplomatic solution. And third, because they seem to enjoy some form of support from other regional countries, which are also keen to have discussions continue with Iran. And I'm talking about other Gulf countries. And it's important to see that very recently the Sultan of Oman went to the United Arab Emirates for coordination over the discussions, in spite of alleged misunderstandings between the two countries since the start of the war, in terms of how they are positioning themselves vis-à-vis Iran. So Oman is trying to operate within that framework. Of course, their margins of maneuver are quite limited. They have no way to pressure the Iranians, so they are acting as what we call a weak mediator. What they have is really benevolence, opening, technical discussions. So this is where they are trying to focus, trying to leverage the political conditions to have technical arrangements that would be agreeable under international law to resume economic flows through the strait. I think this is how they are approaching it.
Akram, let's broaden the picture to Gaza. At least 6 Palestinians have reportedly been killed over the past 24 hours, while a warehouse containing nutritional supplies for malnourished children and pregnant women was destroyed in Deir al-Balah. What does this tell us about the humanitarian situation and the prospects for stabilizing Gaza?
The humanitarian situation has been catastrophic since the 7th of October. Actually, it was catastrophic before the war started, but it has reached appalling levels. Since the agreement, an agreement with Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt acting as guarantor, if you will, was signed. So a ceasefire agreement was signed in October 2025. Israeli bombing has never ceased. Killing has never ceased. And the flow of humanitarian aid has always been constrained. Reconstruction is not happening. So the conditions are appalling, obviously. What we have, and the new development that we have, is that although the US administration seems to have reached an agreement with Hamas for its disarmament, we have an open opposition to this coming, very open, coming from Israel. And therefore, what Israel is doing is maintaining the pressure. And I think one has to be clear-eyed about the fact that the objective of Israel is ethnic cleansing in Gaza. It's worsening the conditions. They have no plan there is no distinguishable plan other than this one. And at the same time, I think the Gaza population is being held hostage to the political agenda of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as elections are coming with polls which are not particularly favorable to him. And second, they are also used as a bargaining chip in this sort of tough discussion that is happening between Netanyahu and the White House, with disagreements piling up. So this is the dire and very sad situation and dramatic situation we have in Gaza, which is again the result of Israeli policies, indecision, and political calculations.
Akram, Israel has also raided and taken control of an UNRWA training center in occupied East Jerusalem, with dozens of people reportedly detained. What are the political and legal implications of the escalation against UNRWA?
I think what is important to bear in mind is that, and it's interesting that you are connecting the situation in Palestine to the situation in Iran. The war in Iran can be read through different lenses, of course, but one of them is that it's one of the wars of after October 7th. And a key thing is that Israel, and Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular, who has been the longest serving Prime Minister in the history of Israel, see this as an opportunity to reshape, to reorder the region with Israel as a would-be hegemon. And the reactions that we are seeing from the region, such as the trilateral Turkish, Pakistani, Saudi agreement, the Mecca agreement, are in part a reaction to this. Iranian action, notably in Hormuz, is in part a reaction to this. It's a life insurance for the regime, right? And so it's about rearranging, remodeling, reordering the region, but in particular, it's also about changing the status quo in mandatory Palestine, so pre-1948 Palestine. So it's the West Bank, it's East Jerusalem, and it's Gaza, and it's the idea that all of this should come under Israeli sovereignty. So I think this is how we should read these different components. Of course, part of this is accelerated by the political circumstances in Israel with the elections coming closer, but I think it's part of these opportunities that Israel is trying to seize, and part of an agenda that I think Netanyahu personally, given his background, is trying to achieve in the Middle East and between the river and the sea, as the expression goes.
Akram Zaouie, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your analysis with us. We appreciate your insights. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Life and hope return to Aleppo's historic markets. Besides restoring its international ties, Syria is also making progress in rebuilding its historic sites. Once devastated by war, Aleppo's ancient souks are now being restored.
More than half of Aleppo's historic markets have been restored, marking a major step in efforts to revive the city's war-damaged old city. The centuries-old souks are a maze of vaulted stone passages and carved wooden shops stretching for around 13 kilometers. Once a major Silk Road trading hub, the markets were home to shops selling everything from soap and jewelry to clothes. For restoration teams, preserving the character of the historic markets was a key priority.
The old markets of Aleppo are part of Aleppo's cultural identity. We carried out several tasks during the study phase, such as collecting old photos of these markets, communicating with shop owners, and matching survey plans with reality in order to be able to preserve the cultural character of this market as it was in the past.
The old city suffered extensive destruction during the war that reached Aleppo in 2012. Airstrikes and shelling damaged and destroyed sections of the medieval markets during more than 4 years of fighting. Reconstruction began after government forces recaptured the city in 2016. Now, restoration is allowing some of the historic markets to reopen, and shopkeepers who were displaced for years are returning to work.
I returned to my shop after 13 years. After it was restored, thank God, I came back to my work and started operating again, just like all the other people who own shops in the old markets, such as in Al-Madina Souk, Al-Muhammas, Al-Hubays, and Al-Sakatiya. They too will return, rebuild, take over their shops, and practice their professions.
The restoration is bringing parts of Aleppo's historic heart back to life, while efforts continue to preserve the old city, which remains a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
After the break, we'll take a look at the remaining global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching A News. The head of the CIA, John Ratcliffe, has made a rare and unannounced visit to Moscow for high-level talks. It is the first known visit to Russia by the agency's director, Ratcliffe, since he took up the post last year. Flight tracking data confirms a U.S. military transport plane landed in Moscow on Tuesday, with a diplomatic motorcade later spotted in the city. Reports indicate Washington asked Ukraine to temporarily suspend its strikes while the American delegation was on the ground. Neither side has officially confirmed the agenda, but analysts suggest the high-stakes trip could focus on managing military escalation or securing the release of U.S. detainees. Russia and Ukraine are preparing another major prisoner exchange, according to Moscow's officials. Russia's Human Rights Commissioner said both sides are finalizing lists of individuals to be handed over. The latest deal follows a similar swap last week, when Moscow and Kiev each exchanged 103 servicemen after mediation efforts from the UAE. On Monday, both sides released 10 people each, according to Belarus state news agency Belta. Prisoner exchanges remain one of the few areas of direct cooperation between the two countries. The United States and Saudi Arabia are moving ahead with a major civilian nuclear energy agreement reached last month. But the deal, which has been sent to U.S. Congress for approval, comes with a key political condition. Here's more.
A major US-Saudi nuclear deal is now tied to a breakthrough in relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. President Donald Trump has sent the proposed 30-year civil nuclear agreement to Congress, but a US administration official told Reuters it will only take effect if Riyadh joins the Abraham Accords and normalizes relations with Israel. The deal, agreed in July between the two countries, would allow US companies to supply civilian nuclear technology to Saudi Arabia, including AP-1000 reactors in a project worth tens of billions of dollars. The agreement was sent to congressional leaders on Monday and is expected to reach committees on Wednesday. Then Congress will have 90 session days to consider it. Trump has repeatedly linked the nuclear pact to Saudi-Israeli normalization, a position also pursued by former President Joe Biden. Riyadh had appeared close to establishing ties with Israel in 2023, but Israel's war in Gaza changed the situation. Then, Saudi Arabia insisted on an irreversible path towards a Palestinian state before recognizing Israel. The Abraham Accords, brokered by Washington, led Israel to establish diplomatic relations with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan in 2020 and 2021. The nuclear project could be worth tens of billions of dollars and benefit Westinghouse, jointly owned by Canada-based Cameco and Brookfield Asset Management. The Saudi embassy in Washington has not yet commented.
The head of Instagram has denied claims that Meta tried to hide negative information about the platform's impact on children. Adam Mosseri has been giving evidence to a district court in Oakland, California. 29 U.S. states have accused Meta of designing Instagram and Facebook to keep young users engaged while failing to properly address safety risks. Meta has said it has worked hard to protect children on its social media. The state has alleged the platforms contributed to mental health problems among children and improperly collected data from users under the age of 13. The federal trial could see the tech giant pay billions of dollars in penalties.
Thank you, sir.
Canada is responding to new U.S. tariffs with its own trade measures targeting hundreds of American products. Ottawa says the move is aimed at protecting Canadian businesses and workers while launching billions of dollars in support for affected industries.
Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on more than 700 US products worth 27.6 billion Canadian dollars, or around 20 billion US dollars. The measures will take effect on September 8th and match the value of the latest US tariffs on Canadian goods, according to the Canadian government.
Today I'm announcing that Canada will match the United States tariffs dollar for dollar, rate for rate. Effective September 8, Canada will impose counter tariffs of up to 15, 25, or 50% on $27.6 billion in imports from the United States of America. For each product, our tariff would match the American tariff on the same type of Canadian good.
The new duties will cover sectors including steel, aluminium, dairy products, agricultural equipment, electronics, and household appliances. Canada will also increase some existing tariffs on steel and aluminium products from 25% to 50%, while measures on US automobiles will remain in place. Alongside the tariffs, Ottawa announced a $7.5 billion Canadian dollar support package for businesses and workers affected by the trade dispute. The government says the program will provide financial assistance, loans and other support.
And so our government is introducing a $7.5 billion package of new enhanced measures. So this package includes a lot of support through different agencies. So if you're a small business right now, you have to contact either your regional development agency or the BDC, which you're potentially already working with.
The latest measures follow Washington's decision to impose 50% tariffs on selected Canadian imports after trade talks between the two countries broke down. Canadian officials say the counter-tariffs are designed to protect domestic industries and encourage consumers to support Canadian-made products. Ottawa says it will continue to defend Canadian economic interests while managing relations with its largest trading partner. The new tariffs mark another escalation in the trade dispute between Canada and the United States, with businesses on both sides watching the impact of the measures.
The U.S. military says it has killed 4 suspected drug traffickers in a targeted strike in the Caribbean Sea. The U.S. Southern Command says a joint task force destroyed a fast-moving vessel operating on established smuggling routes. Officials have released footage of the operation, describing it as part of an ongoing campaign against cartel networks in the Western Hemisphere. Military commanders have vowed to continue executing lethal strikes to dismantle and defeat the syndicates. Meanwhile, the United States is extending its decade-old trade restrictions on Cuba for another year, further targeting officials and state-owned companies. Havana has criticized the decision, saying the move will increase pressure on the country's economy.
Cuba condemns in the strongest possible terms the extension for 1 more year of the economic, commercial and financial blockade imposed by the government of the United States, a genocidal policy that has been maintained against our people for more than 6 decades. The continuation of the so-called Trade with the Enemy Act until September 2027 is not a minor administrative action, but the confirmation that Washington insists in its purpose of suffocating an entire nation. This extension has come at the cruelest moment of the US onslaught against Cuba in recent years.
The United States has suspended visa appointments at its embassies and consulates worldwide. The State Department says the sudden freeze is needed to roll out a global training initiative. It marks the latest stage of the sweeping immigration crackdown in Donald Trump's second term as president.
Across the globe, US visa applicants are receiving sudden cancellation emails. With interviews indefinitely rescheduled, the State Department says its consular officers must first undergo new training. The initiative aims to help staff screen out applicants deemed likely to rely on American public benefits. No timeline has been given for when normal processing will resume. The worldwide freeze is part of a much broader immigration crackdown justified by the US president as a domestic security measure. But the restrictions go far beyond border enforcement. The administration is actively squeezing legal migration by hiking work visa fees. It is also revoking existing visas and green cards over political activities, including participation in pro-Palestinian protests. The strategy faces fierce resistance. Human rights groups condemn the crackdown as discriminatory, warning it violates free speech and fuels racial profiling. The administration is also hitting major legal hurdles. Just last week, a federal judge struck down a separate policy suspending immigrant visas from 75 countries, ruling that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had exceeded his legal authority.
Germany has deported around 30 Afghan nationals to Afghanistan on a charter flight from Leipzig-Halle Airport, according to German media. It comes as Berlin expands its deportation policy to include some Afghans without criminal records. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis in Kabul has more.
According to Afghan news, German media reported that a charter flight left Haley Airport on Tuesday and later arrived here in Kabul, carrying around 30 Afghan nationals. A statement from the German Interior Ministry said that the deported men had largely been convicted of serious offences. The deportations are part of a tougher approach by German authorities towards Afghan asylum seekers who no longer have the legal right to remain in the country. However, Germany is now broadening the policy to include Afghans without criminal records whose asylum claims have been rejected or protection status withdrawn, with thousands of such cases reportedly under review by the country's migration authorities. Previously, Germany had suspended deportations after the Taliban takeover in August 2021, but resumed them in August 2024, initially for convicted criminals. But since then, the policy has expanded. Authorities maintain technical contact with Afghan officials to help facilitate returns, despite not formally recognizing the government. The issue remains controversial, with critics raising concerns about security and human rights for those returning to the country. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
After the break, we'll take a look at the stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching A News. Kazakhstan says it's considering the Baku-Supsa pipeline as a possible alternative route for oil exports. The country's energy minister says over 3 million tons of oil production capacity has been lost because of the ongoing attacks affecting the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. Our correspondent Fariza Kalmurzuna has more.
The Baku-Supsa pipeline is vital for Kazakhstan as an alternative route for its oil exports. That's according to Energy Minister Irlana Kunjenev speaking at a briefing following a government meeting. Kunjenev said there have been no direct talks with Azerbaijan on the route so far, while some groundwork has already been done. Kazakhstan first needs to determine its own position on the issue. He said Kazakhstan has lost around 3.5 million tons of oil production due to attacks on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, the CPC. Those volumes could have been redirected through the port of Aktau and then transported via the Baku-Supsa pipeline. The pipeline has an annual capacity of around 5 million tons. It could also have carried oil from fields where production was temporarily halted or reduced because of export constraints. Kazakhstan already exports oil through Azerbaijan using the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline with around 1.2 million tons transported annually. And Azerbaijan has expressed its readiness to increase that volume to 2.2 million tons a year. The attacks on the CPC have also affected Kazakhstan's production plans. The country has cut its 2026 oil production target by 2 million tons, from 98 million to 96 million. In July alone, the consortium was hit by at least 4 drone attacks. Kazakhstan had initially planned to maintain last year's production level of around 99.5 million tons and move closer to the 100 million ton mark. But the disruptions have forced the country to revise that target. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
The Baku-Supsa option could further strengthen the Trans-Caspian route and reduce Kazakhstan's dependence on infrastructure running through Russia. To discuss what these developments mean for Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and the wider energy map of the region, we're joined from Baku by Nargiz Mamadova, expert in international relations at Caspia Center. Ms. Mamadova, welcome to A News and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me.
Hello. Ms. Mamadova, Kazakhstan remains heavily dependent on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which carried more than 64 million tons of Kazakh oil last year. How realistic is it for Astana to substantially reduce the dependence in the coming years? And how significant is Kazakhstan's decision to explore Baku-Supsa and other alternative export routes following the recent CPC disruptions?
Well, this is a very huge strategy in the energy security policy of Kazakhstan, and the drone attacks on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, it had many times, but previously in late July have once again exposed a structural vulnerability in Kazakhstan energy security. I see this as a trend in the foreign policy, not all of Kazakhstan, but all on the Central Asian countries, as I do not want to demand on one country. In this case, it's Russia. In case of other countries, it's also Russia. So diversification is the main way how to make everything more balanced. And it's like for Kazakhstan, it's having like a plan B, because due to war between Ukraine and Russia, they cannot close their eyes. I mean, Kazakhstan cannot close their eyes and say that, okay, we don't have problem. No, it's a huge problem. It's a problem with the security of the CPC and CPS. And I think that it's the main problem is that Kazakhstan depends on a single export artery. So as you said, and as we said before, the 80% of the export of the Kazakhstani oil to the world market goes through this pipeline. So about the Baku-Supsa, it can be, of course, but we need to understand it. It's not about the abandoning of these pipelines. The Caspian pipeline, okay? It's not about abandoning, or it's not about like declining everything about the Caspian pipeline. No, it's about alternative. One of alternatives is Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, for example, another Baku-Supsa, and the third one actually is the road that goes through from Kazakhstan to China, and also some maritime other suppliers can be maritime exports through Aktau port, for example. So it's also noted that Kazakhstan currently transports about 1 and 2 million tons of oil annually through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan road. And Azerbaijan has expressed readiness to increase this volume. So I think that due to high-level dialogue between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, two sides can find the best solution as an alternative to this problem.
Nargis, what makes the Baku-Supsa route strategically attractive for Kazakhstan, particularly compared with BTC?
Well, I think that, first of all, everything that goes through Azerbaijan is already a huge advantage for the Central Asian countries, but in this case, of course, for Kazakhstan. First of all, they deal with two countries. In this case, I mean, first of all, they deal with Azerbaijan. And when it comes to Baku-Supsa, it has good infrastructure. It has lots of potential. It's already kind of, how to say, it's already research, it's already workable mechanism how to transfer energy. So in this case, of course, we should understand that why Kazakhstan not to Baku-Supsa cannot if the road will be like Caspian tanker transport through Aktau, rail shipments to Georgian ports, and the other alternatives. From all these alternatives, even all together, cannot let's say beat the potential and the capability of the Caspian pipeline. Okay, it's just an alternative. It cannot recharge it, or how to say, it cannot remove the main CPC this pipeline along. No, altogether they can help significantly to Kazakhstan. When it came to Baku-Supsa, I think that the Kazakhstani side already investigated all the pros, all advantages due to all this, because they know that Baku-Supsa works so many years. Why not? Okay.
Nargis, could these developments strengthen Azerbaijan's position as an energy and transit hub between Central Asia and European markets?
Definitely. Each alternative that goes through is a plus for Azerbaijan, first of all. You know that now the Azerbaijan in the energy security and in the foreign policy agenda of Azerbaijan is one of the priorities. We have more than 10 countries in European market that get our oil and gas, and of course, but it doesn't mean that we need to be to European market. No, we need to be flexible to open to Central Asian market, to have, let's say, customers from the Central Asia, from Middle East even, and from other parts of the world. I mean that we are working on it, and if Kazakhstan in this situation goes first of all to Azerbaijan, for asking help, for asking an alternative, it means that we already proved something. We already, let's say, did a good job in energy security and in energy agenda, not only in Azerbaijan, but in the region. So I think that it will push forward the agenda not only to European market, but to the Central Asian countries also.
Nargiz Mammadova, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to A News. We truly appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. 3 days of the Silk Road Finance and Technology Forum in Tashkent are coming to an end. Regulators, investors and technology leaders have been discussing how to build Central Asia's financial technology sector. As the forum wraps up, the question is what comes next for the region? Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
For 3 days, the forum has brought together financial and technology leaders from Central Asia and beyond. The discussion circled on digital finance, cross-border payments, Islamic fintech and investment. But as the forum comes to a close, the focus is shifting from what Central Asia could become to what needs to happen next. So what will it take to turn the region's fintech ambitions into actual growth?
And we get that question in Japan as well, right? So we have very big fintechs in Japan, but they're not going global. And you will see the same thing here. You may have built something that is very successful within the context of Central Asia, but it may not be relevant outside of that context. So for a local company to go global, it will have to have something that typically is very simple and can resonate almost anywhere in the world. Like you have seen, for example, Revolut was a fintech that went global, but it typically is something simple that is universal, that makes that success, rather than something that is very customized and local. So Japanese fintech, same thing. We're still looking forward to see the first global fintech come from Japan, but it is a very vibrant market. So I would focus more on servicing the wider local market than trying to go to other markets, because it can sometimes be very challenging to be successful outside of your home market.
Uzbekistan says it's linking its fintech ambitions to a broader investment strategy. The country says it has attracted $160 billion in foreign investment over the past decade, while its economy has grown more than 2.5 times. As the forum is expected to become an annual platform, the question ahead is not what Central Asia could be, but how much of this region will be realized by the time the region gathers again. Sevil Rajapova, Natik Mamedov and Khalid Aliyev reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
The son of Armenia's former president has been remanded in custody for 2 months as a major corruption probe continues. Sedrak Kocharyan is facing charges of large-scale money laundering and other offenses.
The son of former Armenian President Robert Kocharyan has been remanded in custody for 2 months. Authorities said that the Prosecutor General's office had filed 3 criminal charges against Sedrak Kocharyan, all of which he denies. The decision was made by a court in Armenia. His lawyer, Alexander Kochubayev, confirmed the decision. The former president's office also confirmed Sedrak's detention and said he had been taken to the Anti-Corruption Committee. Sedrak Kocharyan was detained as part of a wider corruption investigation involving his father, Robert. Authorities accused the former president of alleged abuse of official powers, large-scale money laundering, and accepting a large bribe. The investigation reportedly concerns alleged transactions involving state property during Kocharyan's presidency from 1998 to 2008. His lawyers have rejected the accusations and described the case as politically motivated, and he denies all charges. According to the Armenian media, former Armenian President Serge Sargsyan has also been placed under a travel restriction as a pre-trial measure in connection with the ongoing criminal investigation. The investigation is continuing, and none of those accused have been convicted.
Armenia's parliament has approved the government's program for 2026 to 2031, outlining key priorities for the coming years. The government says it will work to formalize peace with Azerbaijan and normalize relations with Turkey, and also strengthen ties with the European Union, the United States, Iran and Georgia, while maintaining relations with Russia. The program also states that Armenia's armed forces will not be deployed outside the country's internationally recognized borders, except for participation in international missions. It also calls for continued military reforms, including the transition to a professional army. At least 14 newborn babies have been killed in a fire at a government-run hospital in Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. It is one of the country's deadliest hospital blazes in recent years. Mariam Zia reports from Islamabad.
Just one baby was rescued after a blaze broke out early Wednesday at the Pakistan Institute of Medical Sciences Hospital here in Islamabad. They were inside the nursery on the third floor of the mother and child hospital. Rescue officials say an air conditioning compressor apparently exploded inside the ward. 6 fire trucks and 4 ambulances were deployed as firefighters brought the flames under control. However, the scale of the deaths has also focused attention on safety in Pakistan's public hospitals. Building fires are common here, where safety regulations and building codes are often poorly enforced. Public healthcare facilities are also frequently under-resourced and overcrowded. At the PIMS hospital, a bereaved father says the ward had no proper fire security or exits.
I wasn't even able to see my daughter, but the condition of the ward is bad. I've been going there for 8 days. The situation was absurd. My wife is in this building and is in much better condition. That building had no fire security, no proper exits. All doors were closed. Only one door was for us to visit our children. They kept the other doors locked because they feared we would come to see our children too often.
Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has ordered an immediate investigation, saying those responsible must be identified and face the strictest action. An inquiry committee is examining the cause and see whether adequate safety measures were in place and how emergency teams responded. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned to A News for more updates.